The world of music has always been filled with legends and lore, but few stories have been as shrouded in mystery and speculation as the tumultuous relationship between Art Garfunkel and Paul Simon. Today, Art Garfunkel steps into the spotlight to tell his side of the story, breaking years of silence to paint a picture of a friendship that became a battlefield. The tale he unfolds is not just about two men at odds, it's about the fragile balance between creative collaboration and personal ambition. Think of the golden days of the 1960s. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, two boys from Queens, rose to fame as the harmonious duo Simon Garfunkel. Their voices intertwined in a way that felt almost otherworldly, creating hits like The Sound of Silence and Bridge Over Troubled Water. To the world, they were a perfect partnership. Behind the scenes, however, cracks were already forming. Garfunkel describes how their friendship, which began in childhood, slowly turned into a power struggle. While they had once been equals, Simon's growing role as the primary songwriter began to overshadow Garfunkel's contributions. Paul Simon, meticulous and ambitious, became the driving force behind their music, while Garfunkel, with his angelic voice, often felt reduced to being just the singer. The dynamic left a bitter taste for both, as Simon felt underappreciated for his songwriting genius, and Garfunkel felt sidelined. By the late 1960s, their creative tensions reached a boiling point. The recording of Bridge Over Troubled Water, their magnum opus, became symbolic of their strained relationship. Simon wrote the title track as a gift to Garfunkel, showcasing his stunning vocals. Yet, instead of bringing them closer, the song became a symbol of their rift. Simon grew resentful of the accolades Garfunkel received for a song he didn't write, while Garfunkel began to feel like a mere vehicle for Simon's ideas. The breaking point came in 1970, during the filming of Catch-22. Garfunkel, pursuing a side career in acting, spent months on location in Mexico, leaving Simon to work on new music alone. The distance between them became not just physical but emotional. Simon saw Garfunkel's absence as a betrayal, a sign that he wasn't committed to their partnership. By the time Garfunkel returned, the duo was barely speaking. When they announced their breakup later that year, it felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability. After the split, both men pursued solo careers. Simon soared with albums like Still Crazy after all these years, cementing his status as a songwriting legend. Garfunkel, while finding some success with hits like All I Know, struggled to step out of Simon's shadow. The disparity in their post-duo success became another point of contention. Garfunkel often expressed frustration that his contributions to Simon Garfunkel were undervalued, while Simon, basking in the spotlight, showed little interest in revisiting their partnership. The duo reunited sporadically over the years, most notably for the legendary 1981 concert in Central Park, which drew over 500,000 fans. On the surface, it was a celebration of their enduring legacy. Behind the scenes, however, old wounds festered. Their attempts to record new music together were plagued by the same creative disagreements that had driven them apart. Each time they came back together, it seemed to end in disappointment and further resentment. Art Garfunkel's candid reflections about Paul Simon opened a floodgate of understanding not just about their own fraught partnership, but about a pattern that rippled through Simon's entire career. Simon was a man whose genius was inseparable from his relentless drive for perfection, a trait that elevated his artistry but left a trail of strained relationships in its wake. For those who dared to stand beside him in his creative pursuit, the experience was often as challenging as it was inspiring. Garfunkel wasn't alone in finding Simon both awe-inspiring and impossible. Picture this: the 1970s, a golden age of poetic songwriters. Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, two towering figures of the era, were often compared. Their music was nothing alike. Dylan's rough-hewn lyrics tumbled out like wildfires, while Simon's words were polished, deliberate, and intricately constructed. Yet this comparison loomed large, fueling a quiet but undeniable tension between the two. Simon admired Dylan, but he was acutely aware of the critical adulation Dylan commanded. The praise Dylan received for his raw authenticity contrasted sharply with the way Simon's meticulous songwriting was sometimes seen as overly crafted. The rivalry wasn't openly hostile, neither launched barbs in interviews, but there was an undercurrent of competition that Simon couldn't quite shake. For a man driven to be the best, the constant shadow of Dylan's legacy was a thorn in his side. Think of it as a collision of two artistic philosophies: Dylan's freewheeling spontaneity versus Simon's precision. To Simon, Dylan's approach might have seemed careless, while Dylan perhaps viewed Simon as too calculated. The unspoken rivalry was emblematic of Simon's larger struggle to earn recognition, not just as a pop artist but as a poet in his own right. In trying to match or even outdo Dylan's cultural significance, Simon pushed himself harder, often at the expense of those around him. If Dylan represented Simon's quiet rival, the collaborators on Graceland symbolized his more direct battles with artistic boundaries. Released in 1986, Graceland was nothing short of revolutionary, a vibrant blend of South African rhythms and Simon's introspective lyricism. It breathed new life into his career, earning Grammy Awards and widespread acclaim. But as with much of Simon's work, its brilliance was accompanied by controversy. At the time, apartheid still gripped South Africa, and an international cultural boycott was in place. Simon, driven by his vision, ignored the boycott and traveled to South Africa to work with local musicians. To him, it was about the music, a bold attempt to bridge cultural divides. But for critics and activists, it was an act of defiance that seemed to disregard the political struggle of the South African people. While Graceland introduced the world to the stunning artistry of South African musicians like Ladysmith Black Mambazo, it also strained Simon's relationships with some of his collaborators. Reports emerged that some musicians felt undercompensated or sidelined in the album's success. To Simon, these complaints were baffling. He had given these artists a global platform, hadn't he? But the controversy highlighted a recurring theme in Simon's career: his tunnel vision, his single-minded focus on the work, often left those around him feeling overlooked or undervalued. Simon's perfectionism was a double-edged sword. It made him the artist who could craft a timeless anthem like The Sound of Silence or innovate with a genre-defying masterpiece like Graceland. But it also made him a collaborator who was nearly impossible to please. His drive was relentless, his standards sky-high. For some, working with Simon was an opportunity of a lifetime. For others, it was an exhausting endeavor that left little room for their own voices. Even in triumph, Simon's need for control sometimes alienated those closest to him. The success of Graceland should have been a moment of unbridled celebration, but instead, it became a lightning rod for controversy. The accusations of cultural appropriation, though hotly debated, underscored how Simon's ambition could overshadow the collaborative spirit he sought to cultivate. Paul Simon's conflicts were as much a part of his legacy as his music. With Bob Dylan, he wrestled with the weight of comparison, striving to prove himself not just a contemporary but an equal. With his Graceland collaborators, he walked the fine line between appreciation and exploitation, often without realizing he had crossed it. These tensions weren't just personal, they were reflections of Simon's unrelenting pursuit of greatness, a pursuit that demanded everything and often left little room for compromise. Art Garfunkel's decision to break his silence about Paul Simon is more than just an airing of grievances, it's a window into the nature of genius and the cost it exacts. Simon's extraordinary talent has always been undeniable. His songs, layered with introspection, vivid storytelling, and melodies that seem to defy time, have become cultural touchstones. His lyrics, often compared to poetry, have inspired generations, but as Garfunkel's revelations remind us, this brilliance did not come without collateral damage. The very qualities that elevated Simon to legendary status often made him a near-impossible partner. His perfectionism, both his greatest asset and his most alienating flaw. Picture this: Paul Simon hunched over a notebook, scribbling lyrics with surgical precision, rewriting the same line dozens of times until it captured exactly what he wanted to say. To the outside world, this is the dedication of a master craftsman. To those working alongside him, it could feel like an unyielding force, draining and relentless. Art Garfunkel often bore the brunt of Simon's obsessive nature. For Simon, there was no compromise, no good enough. It was either perfect or it wasn't worth doing. This uncompromising drive, while key to his success, often came at the expense of his relationships, leaving collaborators feeling more like instruments than equals. The duality of Simon's genius is perhaps best illustrated by the very music he created with Garfunkel. Their harmonies were angelic, and their songs were imbued with a sense of unity that felt almost transcendent. Yet behind those harmonious notes was a dynamic fraught with tension. While their music suggested perfect synergy, their relationship was anything but. Garfunkel, with his ethereal voice, often felt overshadowed by Simon's dominance as a songwriter. Meanwhile, Simon, despite his accolades, struggled with an unshakable need to prove himself. Their collaboration was a delicate dance, one that could produce unparalleled beauty but also left emotional wreckage in its wake. Think of their breakup in 1970, when Simon and Garfunkel were at the pinnacle of their success. Most duos might have relished the moment, basking in the glow of a record-breaking album like Bridge Over Troubled Water. Instead, Simon and Garfunkel were unraveling, their partnership collapsing under the weight of personal and creative differences. For Simon, it was an opportunity to step out of Garfunkel's shadow and assert his individual identity. For Garfunkel, it was a painful reminder of how easily Simon could sever ties when he felt constrained. Their split was not just the end of a musical partnership, it was the fracturing of a friendship that had begun in childhood. Paul Simon's legacy is one of stark contrasts. On one hand, his music is celebrated for its timelessness, a body of work that bridges generational divides and remains deeply relevant. On the other hand, the story behind his success is marked by fractured relationships, missed opportunities, and the emotional toll of his relentless ambition. His perfectionism was a double-edged sword, driving him to create works of unparalleled beauty, while alienating those who stood closest to him. Today, the music of Simon Garfunkel continues to inspire millions. The Sound of Silence and Bridge Over Troubled Water are not just songs, they are monuments to a partnership that, despite its flaws, produced something extraordinary. But the story behind those songs serves as a poignant reminder that even the most beautiful harmonies can emerge from discord. For Simon and Garfunkel, their shared brilliance was both a gift and a curse, a bond that brought them together but could never quite hold them there. The legacy of Simon Garfunkel is not just about musical innovation, it is a testament to the fragile balance between collaboration and individuality, between creation and conflict. In their story, we see the price of chasing greatness, a price that neither man could avoid. Paul Simon's genius, while awe-inspiring, was often isolating. It is a legacy of contrasts, beauty and bitterness, harmony and discord, triumph and regret. And perhaps that is what makes their story so deeply human. It reminds us that even the most extraordinary achievements are shaped by the complexities of the people behind them.